Hi, I'm Pete Sweet with the Extension Office in James City County, here with three of our speakers from this year's Super Turf Saturday, Dr. Mike Goatley, Sam Doak, and Dr. David McCall. Dr. Goatley, what can you tell us about turf management relevant to James City County?
It's going to be tough, Pete. That'll be the first thing I want to tell you, because there's no easy solution to picking the absolute best grass over here, and that's usually what I cover at our Super Turf Saturday programs. But trying to find that grass that best meets your expectations, best meets your property, those are two things that we're going to try to cover, and we'll do a little bit of that here today.
All right, great. And the relevance of that as far as soils go, Sam Doak, could you help us a little bit with that?
Well, you have such a wide range of soils here in James City County, everything from sand down by the river to where it's almost all clay. And what you really want to do is create the best growing environment you can, and that way you have a healthier stand of grass with less problems down the road, but it all starts with getting a good basic start on your soils.
Well, I spend a lot of time punching holes in the soils here, and typically 235 pounds gets about 2 inches in the ground, because we have a little bit of sand and then we have clay. And what do we need to do to get around that? Any suggestions?
Well, best thing to do is probably, well, the easiest thing you can do is put a good soil amendment, a good composted or organic material in there when you do the composting. I think, Mike, the recommendation is about an inch.
About a quarter of an inch
Quarter of an
per
inch.
application is what we're looking for to do that. And if you can tie it together with punching the holes, like you said, which would be a great thing to do in the fall on cool season grasses, so your tall fescue lawns, great time to do that and bring in a quarter of inch compost. And you can do that once to twice a year. And you're not going to have immediate results, but over the next 2 or 3 seasons, you're going to start to improve the soil, and you're also going to start to improve your turf.
Great. Dr. McCall, I get calls this time of year about brown spot. It's generally what I get. My yard's turning brown.
Yes.
What can I do about it?
Well, I guess it all depends on, again, on expectations, what you're willing to live with, what you're willing to, what kind of inputs you're willing to put into your turf. If you're talking about the tall fescue lawns, which most people at least start off with tall fescue in this this area, yes, brown patch is going to be the biggest issue. And I typically tell people they can go one of two directions. Either they can basically learn to love it, live with it for a little while, and in the fall most likely it will recover. Or I will say, well, you probably need to get on some sort of a program to try to manage the brown patch as best you can. Now, we will, I'm sure, be discussing this evening and tomorrow at Super Turf Saturday. Certainly one of the things that we will hear over and over again is, if you can keep healthy turf, if you can keep your mowing height right, your fertility right, your when you irrigate, if you can keep all those things the way they need to be, chances are your brown patch won't be too terribly bad.
What I get often is people saying, I've got brown patch, but I fertilized it a lot and I'm watering it a lot. Why do I still have brown patch?
Yes, that's certainly one of the misconceptions. A lot of people will think that they can just kind of fertilize their way out of brown patch, whereas actually in reality, if you over-fertilize, that's when you actually have more of an issue. You put out too much nitrogen, you get a lot of lush growth at the wrong time of year. You have basically a perfect environment for the fungus to be able to spread, and that's when you have your worst problems.
If you had an irrigation system, when would be the ideal time to irrigate in order to reduce disease pressure?
The ideal time to irrigate it, if you're going to be trying to reduce pressure, would be sometime during the middle of the night when there's already going to be dew and guttation water on the leaves. This is really the best time to irrigate if you have an automated system set up. Ideally, maybe 4 a.m. to 6 a.m., sometime in that range, because you'll be actually knocking the dew that is on the leaves off. You'll be speeding up the drying process, and you'll have less disease.
What if I turn around and say, what's the absolute worst time to irrigate?
The absolute worst time. I see people in my neighborhood doing this all the time. If you go out and water probably around 7 p.m. or so, say an hour or two before you start to get the dew forming, what you're doing is you're actually extending that leaf wetness period. So yes, it seems like a good time to go out and do it, but from a disease management standpoint, if you are extending that leaf wetness period, you'll certainly have more disease.
Okay, let me ask you this. We were just talking about this on the ride over here. What I see in this area in the early spring or late winter is people trying to chase that green up. They're out there putting the nitrogen down, trying to get that green lawn. What would be some of the outcomes to something like that? Now, whoever feels like they want to talk about that.
It probably depends on, do you have warm season turf, a Bermuda or a zoysia, or do you have a cool season turf, tall fescue, ryegrass, some others in there, because they have different times it's better to fertilize than others. And if you get them mixed up, you can really harm things like David said, getting it too lush, too early. The best time for cool season grass really is in the fall. It's not kind of on the big programs you see on TV and here to use our bag at this time or 4 bags a year or whatever. But the best time for cool season grass really is to put somewhere between 80 or 90% of your nitrogen or your fertilizer on during the fall months. September, October, November, and to put only a little bit on into spring to encourage growth, but not get it so lush that you're going to have a lot of other problems. And somebody else can talk about warm season grass, because that's a completely different time.
Yeah, warm season, we will be looking for mid-May into about mid-August is saying prime time to fertilize, and those grasses are going to respond. And Pete, what I always get a kick out of when people call me and tell me, but that's not how we did it in Wisconsin, or that's not how we did it when I lived in upstate New York. And I'm like, well, we're not in Wisconsin or upstate New York because our fertility program is really geared towards this transition zone. And this is a really difficult place to grow any grass that we've got. But Sam is right on. It's fall is when we should be fertilizing cool season lawns, but it's not a time when everybody's really thinking about working in the lawn. It's kind of like, I'm ready to put the mower away. I'm ready to quit cutting grass. Why would I want to fertilize now? If you want that best grass for 2015, fall is when it should be done.
Knowing this area, knowing the little eco-environment, our own little climate system that we've got here, knowing the water all around us, the rivers all around us, what would be the harm in putting nitrogen down at the wrong time of year if the turf's not using it?
Well, turf has a natural life cycle anyway of when it puts on most of its growth into roots or into shoots, and you want to try to follow that along. Most of the time, warm season grasses put a lot of root and shoot growth in the summer. That's why you fertilize there. But for cool season grass, it puts down most of its shoots down in the fall. It's getting ready to go into winter and come out. And so it's really at that time programmed to put a lot of its storage down, get a bigger root system down. And that's why you feed a cool season grass in the fall. If I get a really healthy root system, then my plant's going to survive a whole lot longer than it is. And if in the spring I put a lot of nitrogen fertilizer on a cool season grass, I'm going to get a whole lot more top growth. I'll be mowing it like crazy. And then don't put as much into the root system, so I've got weaker roots. I'm mowing it like crazy. I've got more disease issues coming on. So if you can do all the right things, like David said, between fertilizing and aerating and watching your irrigation and mowing it at the right height, because there is a definite height in there, you can eliminate an awful lot of your weed problems and disease problems just by creating a healthier environment for your turf. It'll crowd out weeds, it'll be healthier, and it'll fight off diseases a whole lot better too.
Yeah, David has the recipe to make disease, which I use in my Master Gardener training. It's scalping, too low mowing in the spring on
Yes,
fescue,
exactly, yes.
excessive spring nitrogen,
Yes,
and then third one would be mismanagement of irrigation.
that's right.
And if you want to
Yeah,
have
3 or
disease,
4
which
times a day.
he wants disease for his research trials to test his products, test grasses, so he makes it happen, and that's the recipe to make it happen. And how many homeowners are guilty of doing that? So they've got the recipe too.
We've got some good test plots for you around
All
here.
right.
So what relation would pH have on this nitrogen and the plant using nitrogen?
It's all about the efficiency of that plant and how it grows. So We haven't said anything about soil testing. And you say, well, what would be one thing that you would, if I came to visit somebody and would say, and Turf Love is going to do this as part of their program, is the value of that soil test is going to allow you to make informed decisions. And so if that pH range isn't, what we'd like to see is ideally just a little bit less than 7, slightly acidic. It is dictating so much of the nutrient availability that that plant needs, because you could have all the nutrients in the world out there, but if the pH is inappropriate, that plant can't utilize it. So it's that critical. It basically is what's going to make your nutrition work or not work.
Okay, so if we get our soil test, then we find out whether or not we need to adjust our pH. Would be the first thing anyone should do. So if someone was putting nitrogen or any nutrients down without a soil test, what would be the chances of the plant even using that nitrogen or nutrients?
You're just guessing. You have no reason. There are people that uses Mike's great 10-10-10, calls it comfort food for plants. Well, I put these bags down for the last 20 years, and you probably have a lot of, if it's N, P, and K, and 10-10-10 for every 1 pound of N, and putting 1 pound of P, 1 pound of K, and the plant doesn't use all those equally. So you've probably built up an excess of P and K. So why am I spending money to put that down in my yard if the plant really doesn't need it? A soil test will get you the right pH, or tell you what you need to adjust the pH, and also will tell you nutrients you need to put down. You may not need to put down specific nutrients in your plant or on your yard. So why am I paying for that in a bag when I'm not going to be using it? Like Mike said, it's making informed decisions. The soil test will tell you what you have to put down and why you have to put down. You won't be guessing.
If we're putting nitrogen down incorrectly, I keep saying nitrogen, but any nutrients, if we're applying them incorrectly and the plants don't take them, and it's nitrogen or K, or it's not sticking to the soil, what relation would that have on our water system?
It could end up in your water system. So our two emphasis points are definitely on nitrogen and phosphorus. And those are two, and phosphorus is a huge problem with water quality. Some of the things that have gone on this year up in the Ohio area around, is it
Toledo, I
Toledo, with the algae bloom, and that's what we're worried about. Same things happen in our water sources as well. When you get excessive phosphorus in water, we can get these algae blooms. So that's where we're trying to use that soil test to make that informed decision, because you could flip it around, Pete, and if phosphorus is deficient, it would be environmentally irresponsible to not apply phosphorus to grow a healthy plant. But as Sam said, the 10-10-10 concept of fertilizing lawns, we hope we're moving past that, because we've got too much information available to us these days to just use what we are comfortable with. Let's move beyond being comfortable and let's use what we need.
We see a lot of soils here that are already high in phosphorus. What relation is that phosphorus to the starter fertilizer that we would apply?
If it's high in phosphorus, then it comes down to why would we be applying phosphorus. Only way you would know it was high was if you'd had your soil tested. So, I mean, you've got to do that. Those go hand in hand. The soil test comes back, and that's what they're going to give you as a recommendation, give you a value, et cetera. For most of us outside, the scientists might say, well, how many pounds per acre is that? That's tough to remember, but they're going to come back and give you a recommendation about you need or don't need to do this. So that's why we're constantly emphasizing the value of that soil test, is because if it's there, pH is appropriate, there's not going to be a response that you're going to get to that phosphorus, and potentially you're going to be moving phosphorus off-site into the water system.
The soil can only hold so much phosphorus, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So if we've got an abundance of phosphorus or abundance of nitrogen or any other nutrients, and the soil doesn't hold it, it ends up in the water system, or in our water ecosystem, end up in our water system.
Yeah.
It was typically, years ago, development was that you would get rid of water as fast as you can. We see a lot of paved ditches getting rid of the water. And now in James City County, we have a program to actually contain the water on property. We're learning a lot more than we used to know. And as far as that goes, it's part of nutrient management. So hopefully we'll see some results out of that. It's baby steps, like you said. We're trying to get the education out there. What have we missed so far that you all would like to touch base on we hadn't gone over?
One thing would be when you're applying fertilizer, just like you said, the paved ditches, that really is a concrete lined pipeway into some water supply. So anything you hose off of your driveway or hose off your sidewalk that's going to go into your storm drain pretty much has no chance of being absorbed into the soil because it's a concrete lined pipe, usually into some waterway somewhere. So when you're applying fertilizer, be careful, sweep it all, put it back on the yard where it's supposed to be so it doesn't wash down into the storm drains. And be careful with anything else, leaves piled on the side of the road can leach nutrients out too. So you want to be careful with what you're putting in and where it's going.
If we're returning our clippings, lawn clippings, if we've learned the proper maintenance and we're returning our clippings, is there a way to actually measure or equate that return clippings to nitrogen measurement?
There's some guesstimates. It's about a third of your seasonal nitrogen requirement
Yeah,
can be
something
met.
like that.
So it's not absolute, because even different grasses will vary a little bit, but it's about a third of your seasonal nitrogen requirement. So if you figure out a plan to say, and part of what we'll be talking at this year's Super Turf Saturday program, as David's mentioned about, and Sam both, expectations, is what is your expectation for a lawn? And if you've got, I want to have Augusta National for my lawn, then that's a different expectation if somebody's, green is good. So you got to make that call. But anytime you can return whatever is being clipped on your lawn, that's basically slow release fertilizer, because those clippings are going to be broken down and released back into that soil environment. So some of that is going to end up back in that plant.
So you won't need to put down as much fertilizer per year if you return your clippings. If you don't, then you probably have to put down a little bit more fertilizer in a year to make up for the loss of those clippings. Not to mention, if you bag the clippings, they're just going to end up in landfill. And that's not really an efficient use of your resources.
Now, one of the reasons I hear people talk about clippings, and you can address this, David, is they're worried about, I need to bag my clippings because I think I'm going to spread disease around. Is that true or false or somewhere in between?
It really depends on the disease you're talking about. For the most part, brown patch is our biggest issue. And I can tell you the fungus that causes brown patch is everywhere anyway. So honestly, it's not really contributing that much. There have been a lot of studies to look to see whether or not returning clippings will increase the amount of disease. And there's really not a lot of evidence to say that it's going to cause a significant increase. So I don't think there's an issue. Now, what I do see an issue with is, and I'm guilty of this too, but when you go too long without mowing, say you wait 2 weeks, maybe longer than that.
It's been raining.
Yeah, it's been raining, and all of a sudden you're taking off 75% of your clippings, or of the leaf blades, and then those clippings just fall back and they basically mat up and don't break down quite the way they should. Several things are happening there, but one of the biggest issues that, from a disease perspective, is you're basically creating that perfect environment where it's warm, it's humid underneath those leaves, and it's a perfect place for the fungus to keep growing and growing. And then you're going to certainly have a lot more brown patch to contend with.
So how much? Go ahead.
So typically, ideally, you want to only take off about 1/3 of the leaf blade, so that you don't, one, shock the plant, and two, you don't have massive amounts of clippings just sitting on top of your lawn.
And keep sharp blades.
Oh, and keep sharp blades. Yes, that's actually probably one of the biggest questions I get from either homeowners or sometimes even lawn care operators. They'll come in and think they have a disease, and I look at the leaves, and the tops of the leaves are just completely shredded, and that's typically from where they haven't been keeping sharp blades. What they do is, as the blades make the cut, it just typically shreds the top of the leaves. You've got, one, an ugly surface, and two, it's really jagged. There's a lot of places for fungi to come in and cause more issues.
So we've got a review to make sure we've got this right. We're getting a soil sample to tell us what nutrients we're deficient of and where our pH is. Okay, then we'll adjust our pH up or down. How would that work?
Depending on what the soil sample, what that soil test report tells you.
Okay.
So we're going to follow it.
Typically in this area, we don't have a typical in this area. We would range, I don't see many over mid-7s, and I don't see many under 6, but they do happen. If someone, say, is 5'8", what would be the best recourse in a pH level?
They're going to try to probably get it up into the mid sixes. And at 5'8", I don't think they're going to have like a lawn that's failing or plants that are failing, but it'll be a situation where they could do better. And so they're going to get a lime recommendation, and that recommendation is hopefully going to bring them up to probably somewhere in the 6'5", 6'6" range in terms of what they're looking for. So we would like to see it stay just on the bottom side of 7 to optimize nutrient availability. So that's what that soil test report is going to give them back, that data to say specifically, do this, apply this much, and apply it at this period of time. So they're
Okay.
going to make it prescription.
If they are high, if they're over 7, say, what would be the recourse?
Then it's more challenging, but what they'll be doing is either using a product probably like sulfur, and they'll have a recommendation on how to use that, and that's not quite as simple as using lime because there's more foliar burn potential. Or they'll talk about using some acidifying nitrogen fertilizers like ammonium sulfate perhaps, and they'll give them a program, a recommendation on to follow there to start working that pH down a little bit.
Okay, you mentioned foliar burn. I guess we see a lot of people putting fertilizer down to chase whatever problem they have, thinking that's going to take care of it. What are some risks about as far as foliar burn goes and using nitrogen?
Soluble,
Yeah.
soluble
Quick
fertilizers.
release.
Yeah, the quick release fertilizers are very likely to provide foliar burn. And so you always see it's, and as a rule of thumb, we tell people, hey, be sure to water your fertilizer in.
Okay.
But we're definitely seeing more interest, and we're promoting it about using more controlled release or slowly available nitrogen to reduce the leaching concerns that we've talked about and where the nitrogen ends up, but to also extend that response and to minimize foliar burn because those materials aren't as water soluble. And the foliar burn, I get lots of questions, what is the burn? The burn is actually a leaf desiccation in which basically the fertilizer pellets are so soluble, they literally pull the water out of the leaf and it desiccates that tissue. So the plant's going to grow out of it, but it's telling you probably didn't optimize your fertilizer application the way you applied it.
And it could stress the plant. The energy it needs to grow out of that could cause further problems down the road, I guess, like you say, with stem growth, root growth, not being balanced.
Yep.
Okay, so we figured out, we've got the soil test, we've got the pH adjusted, now we're starting to we figure out the nitrogen or nutrient recommendation the soil test gives us. We've got the grass growing. If we've got the maintenance corrected, we have sharp blades, we're cutting the grass in hot weather.
At the right height, because cool season grass cuts differently from warm season grass. It's amazing how many people go out and buy the mower, and you ask them, what height are you cutting? It's whatever was at the shop. Well, it depends on your grass for what you should be mowing it at, so you should check. I mean, warm season grasses generally mow lower, cool season grasses generally mow higher, but it depends on what you have. And talk to people like the lawn rangers and the people in Turf Love program. They can give you some good recommendations about what to mow the grass.
Okay. All right, we've got the right height now. We're mowing the grass. We've got the right nitrogen down. So how long will it take before I can see results? If I've got the pH right, I've got a typical soil in James City County, about 1 inch. How many years is it going to take me to get the soil that I need? And will I get there? Have we talked about aeration and amendments yet?
We mentioned a little bit about coring and composting. And
Okay.
again, the compost applications, you're going to get there, but it's going to be seasoned. So it's not going to be 1 year. But I really think that you would see a response to compost applications that first season about what's going on. But long term, you got to do some pretty significant activity to improve that soil. And we're going to try to improve it both chemically and physically by making that compost application. And that's tying that together with coring. Think about when you would core. Sam's talking about the grasses. You would core warm season grasses during the summer when they're actively growing. You would ideally core cool season grasses in the fall or early to mid-spring when they're optimally growing. So it all ties together with knowing what plants you have when that plant's growing. That's when you're going to make the biggest, the bulk of these activities that we're talking about doing.
Okay, so over a period of a few years, we probably can start seeing a deeper root base, a little better soil, and if we stay with it, we're eventually going to turn this soil into this soil. Am I right?
Yes.
And the one other factor we haven't talked about is light. So if you got trees on top of that really thin soil, there's another huge limitation. And I see a lot of beautiful trees here in James City County area. And again, I wouldn't cut those trees down. But people that want to have this lush, beautiful lawn underneath these tremendous oak trees out there, it's just not going to happen. So you've got to kind of make some concessions as to what you want to have. And if you're trying to grow grass, you're going to have to do some regular fall seeding of tall fescue to keep, thickening it up. You're going to have to raise those cutting heights, and you're going to have to pay very close attention to the moisture requirements because that tree is getting a lot of that water. So I always tell people they want both, the best of both worlds, and I'm like, trees and turf in general, they don't mix together very well.
Tree's going to win that battle.
Tree's going to win that battle.
It's no harm, I guess, in expanding your natural garden area if it's going to be a battle growing grass.
Yep.
And cool season grass, thin-bladed fescue may do a little better than warm season grass, but it's still going to be an uphill battle to try to get grass to grow in the shade.
Yep.
Okay, what else haven't we covered? Anything we've missed?
Mike, what would you think about in the situation you're talking about, Pete, with underneath trees, don't have a lot of light? What about looking at some of those warm season grasses like a zoysia grass? Obviously, Bermuda grass won't do well, but Mike, where would you stack zoysia grass up compared to a fine fescue?
Well, it depends on how much shade there is, and that's a tough one to say.
Yeah.
And I give people kind of my ballpark estimation is if you don't have at least 4 hours of direct light per day, then you're probably fighting an uphill battle trying to grow any turf grass in there. So fine leaf fescues are definitely better than any other cool season turf we have as shade tolerance goes. And if I was going to try to grow a fine leaf fescue in this area, it would probably be better suited to our shaded condition. Zoysia grass is much better than Bermuda grass, but if it gets much less than that 4 hour window, it's going to be an uphill struggle all the way through. So, we got the trees. Right around those trees, you need to be looking at beds, at shade-loving perennials, some other things like that, or else just accept that grass is always going to be a little thin underneath there because that tree is getting light, water, and a lot of nutrients.
You see a lot of problems with the front yard's nice and sunny, and the backyard's got all the trees and the shade, and they're trying to treat them both exactly the same, and sometimes that doesn't work out very well.
Well, I wasn't going to bring it up, but since you mentioned front yards and backyards, let me ask this question. And I get this sometimes. I've got some Bermuda grass growing in my front yard, but my backyard is fescue. What would be a problem, advantage or a disadvantage with someone trying to maintain a cool season in one yard and a warm season in another yard?
It looks nice, but they're going to tend to spread into each other, and that area where they overlap, that's going to look different than anything else. Really, when you look at a yard, you want to look all uniform and the same. If you've got warm season and cool season in a particular area, then there's no reason to keep them from overlapping into each other. You always can have some area that's going to look off most of the time. That really is the biggest problem. If you're looking just for something green, if you've been fighting Bermuda grass in your front yard for 20 years, well, maybe it's telling you it's really better adapted for Bermuda grass, but you have to look at that stuff because it spreads. Bermuda grass has above ground runners and below ground runners, and it spreads, everybody knows, into flower beds, onto sidewalks, everything else, and the tall fescue doesn't do that. So it's a little better
And
behaved.
Sam, we want people to know that Bermuda grass is the same thing as wiregrass. Because you hear that a lot over here. So I don't have Bermuda grass, I have wiregrass. So
Depends on whether you're trying to keep it or get rid of
if
it.
you want to grow it, it's Bermuda. And if you're trying to kill it, it's wiregrass. It's all the same stuff.
I've heard you say more than once, and I repeat it often, if you start pulling on that wiregrass, you're just picking a fight.
Yeah.
And you're probably not going to win it.
Yeah. Sam just touched the biggest issue people have with warm season grasses is that predictable dormancy period, which is over here is going to be brown from November through March, almost every year, guaranteed. And can you accept or tolerate that I've got a brown yard? And I always tell people, you got a maple tree. Do you like your maple tree? Of course I like my maple tree. I said, do you cut it down when it loses its leaves in the fall? And they look at you like you're crazy. And I'm like, well, why can't you accept that your warm season grass is basically doing the same thing? Similar type of thing. It's shutting down for the year. So that's what people have to really get over, that they can live with a dormancy period. And if they can't live with that, then we talk about you could paint it, which is not crazy anymore. You could dye that lawn, or you could overseed Bermuda grass with ryegrass if you don't mind going to all the trouble and the expense.
I've seen people try to overseed Bermuda with ryegrass? What's some of the problems they have with that? I know it's not recommended as profound as it was at one time. Can you expand a little bit on that?
You want to take this one?
I'd say the problem is the only reason you're putting the ryegrass in there is to get green during the winter. And in the spring, when the Bermuda grass starts to turn green, you still have the ryegrass in there. So now the ryegrass becomes the weed because I don't want it in there, and you have to try to transition, get rid of it somehow. That usually is more of a challenge in this area than than homeowners want to go through. It's nice that it's green, but at some point you have to make a decision: do I want the ryegrass in there, or do I want the Bermuda grass in there? And getting some of the new ryegrasses to go away can be a serious challenge. So you have sort of a blotchy yard as the ryegrass is transitioning out because of the weather or the heat or something else, and the Bermuda's coming in. So it's not really, I'm green one day, and then all of a sudden you get the most beautiful yard in the winter, it's all nice and green, and then in the spring, when the ryegrass starts to go away, and if you're helping it go away, and then the Bermuda grass starting to come in, it looks off. And they'll talk to you, like 2 weeks later, it used to look so good, what happened to it? So, and that's a part of it if you want to do that, and you had the expense of overseeding with the ryegrass, so I now have to water it and fertilize it a little bit in the fall and mow it in the fall, because dormant Bermuda grass is brown. Once you make that last mowing, that's all you have to do until it starts greening up again, so that could be an advantage. It just is a lot of maintenance and a lot of care. I teach about turf grass management, and my yard certainly isn't the best one in the neighborhood because I'm trying to do an example. But no, I don't want to spend all my time on the yard. If you've got more time in your hands than you need, then maybe you want to try the Bermuda grass, ryegrass thing, because it takes a lot of time to make it look good and maintain it.
And we just talked about shade, and imagine how much shade is delivered by one grass over another. It's no different. It's like instead of trees, now we're talking about ryegrass shading the Bermuda grass, and one of the biggest weaknesses of Bermuda grass as a species is it has very poor shade tolerance, and that's why we never try to grow Bermuda grass in the shade.
Okay, is there any danger if the ryegrass is not leaving and the Bermuda wants to come, in that little transition area, if the ryegrass shades Bermuda, is there any chance of weeds having a bigger input than the Bermuda? So maybe we get some winter weeds that are coming up at that time?
It's a two-way street, because if it's really thick overseeding, that can actually reduce winter weed pressure. And Dr. Askew, our turf weed specialist, has done a lot of research showing that, hey, if you want to eliminate Poa annua without using any pesticide, herbicide, you could control a lot of it by the overseeding rate. But it's a two-edged sword here. I said two-edged street. It gets you later on because of all the competition from that Bermuda, because when that ryegrass does die, that Bermuda grass plant is just trying to come on. So now all those voids where the ryegrass has died, that Bermuda grass isn't going to fill it in immediately. So it gets you coming or going, just depends on when it gets you.
Sounds like you better be a professional lawn care expert to start to handle this overseed. Seems like a big job.
Or to work with a professional lawn care expert, because it's tough.
Sounds like a tough job.
Like the lawn rangers.
Like our lawn rangers. Our lawn rangers are our professional master gardeners. We're our turf experts. We come to your house and try to use the research that these scientists show us as part of our Turf Love program. You can have us come out to your yard. You can get our application either online at JCCWMG, which is James City County Williamsburg Master Gardeners.org, and click on the Turf Love application and mail it in. Or you can go by the extension office, or you can call the extension office, or you can go out in front of the treasurer's office on Mounts Bay Road, fill out the application. We'll come out and do the work for you. We'll take the soil sample. We'll bring you back a program that tells you what to do, when to do, how much to do it, using the research that these professionals and scientists show us. And if you don't come to Super Turf Saturday, you can hear them speak yourself. If you don't come, though, you have to rely on myself or other master gardeners. Is there anything else that we need to cover?
I think we've done a pretty thorough job. Probably confusing everyone, Pete, but we tried.
Okay, great.